It really feels like we're living in a world of constant, accelerating change, doesn't it? From technology and markets to, global pandemics and climate events, the ground beneath our feet just feels like it's always shifting. The old ways of planning for what's next, well, they're starting to feel pretty outdated.
So that brings us to the big question, the one we're really going to dig into here. How do you possibly prepare for a future that is, by its very nature, unpredictable? And this is a question that hits everyone, from a CEO trying to map out their next 5 years to a government trying to protect its people. The answer, as we're about to see, isn't about finding some magic crystal ball. It's about a huge shift in how we, all of us, think, plan, and act.
Okay, so let's dive in. Here's our roadmap. We're going to start small, at the micro level, looking at how a single organization can try to see what's coming. Then we'll zoom out to the national level. From there, we'll get into the human element, the resilience factor, and explore a whole new mindset for making decisions. And finally, we'll see why our greatest strength might just be each other.
Right, so let's start with a single organization, a single company. In a world of crazy disruption, it is so easy to get tunnel vision. You're just so focused on what you're doing, on your market, that you get completely blindsided by a change that comes from a totally different direction. So how do you break out of that tunnel and see the disruption before it hits you?
Well, the answer is a practice called horizon scanning. And the keyword here really is structured. This is not about just randomly scrolling the news. The whole point isn't to predict the future perfectly. It's to systematically pick up on those kind of weak signals of change that could eventually become massive trends. It gives you time to get ready for challenges and, just as important, to grab onto new opportunities.
And this is a really disciplined, step-by-step process. First, you define your scope. What are you looking for and where? Then you cast a super wide net, spotting all sorts of signals. I mean, think about it. Today's weird fringe idea could be tomorrow's industry standard. A decade ago, generative AI was this niche thing in academia. Now, it's completely reshaping entire industries. From there, you work together to narrow it down, do a deep analysis, and then translate it into real action. And the crucial part? It never, ever stops. It's a constant cycle of monitoring and adapting.
Okay, so this whole framework is really powerful for a business. But what happens when the signal you're trying to pick up isn't a new product or a new competitor, but the first hint of a global pandemic or an extreme climate event?
And that question brings us to the national level. A lot of governments are still trying to manage these massive, interconnected risks with these siloed, one-thread-at-a-time approaches. One department for pandemics, another for cyber attacks, a third for climate change. But these threats, they don't care about our neat little organizational charts.
So what's missing is the foundation itself, a system of what's called risk governance. This isn't about managing one specific risk. It's about building the entire governmental machine that guides and coordinates all the risk reduction efforts. Think of it this way. You can have the best players in the world, but if you don't have a coach and a game plan, you don't really have a team. Risk governance is the game plan for the whole nation.
And this is where that big idea becomes something real. This concept of governance actually breaks down into 5 concrete things a government can build. You need a clear strategy, the right organizational structure, ways to make fast decisions, proper funding, and maybe the most important thing of all, a culture that actually values managing risk.
And this isn't just theory. We're actually seeing this shift happen in the real world. The UK's integrated review, for instance, was an attempt to do exactly this, to connect the dots between foreign policy, security, and development, and build a single cohesive plan for national resilience.
But here's the catch. You can have the most brilliant government frameworks, the most well-funded agencies in the world, but those plans are only as strong as the society they're meant to protect. If the social fabric itself is fraying, no government plan is going to hold it together when a real crisis hits.
This brings us to the human factor. Societal resilience. It isn't just about roads and bridges and emergency plans. It's about people. It's about our collective ability as a community to handle shocks, to adapt, and even to transform when things get really disruptive.
And right at the heart of a resilient society is something called social cohesion. And it's built on 2 really critical types of trust. First, there's vertical trust. That's our faith in institutions, in the government, and the system. Then there's horizontal trust, and that's the trust we have in each other, even people who look and think differently than we do. When both of those are strong, we're willing to cooperate and overcome pretty much anything.
And this diagram just illustrates so brilliantly how fragile that trust can be. This is not a simple problem. It's a tangled web.
Just follow the arrows. You can see how declining trust in institutions directly fuels political polarization. That, in turn, is linked to growing inequality. These aren't separate issues. It's a cascading system where one problem feeds the next, weakening the entire structure.
So the crucial takeaway here is this. When we talk about threats to social cohesion, we're talking about this whole cluster of things that feed off each other. Misinformation, a growing sense of powerlessness, economic insecurity. They create this dangerous, vicious cycle that can seriously weaken a society's ability to respond when a real shock finally hits.
Okay, so we've got businesses facing disruption, governments facing catastrophes, and societies facing fragmentation. The common thread here is that we are all dealing with what experts call deep uncertainty. We're facing wicked problems, issues that are so complex and so interconnected that they are basically impossible to fully define, let alone solve with one simple fix.
So to navigate this, we need a major change in our mindset. For decades, the dominant approach was predict, then act. The goal was to make the most accurate forecast you could and then build the one perfect plan based on it. But that plan is brittle. If your assumptions are wrong, the whole thing shatters. The new mindset is all about agree on decisions. It starts by admitting we can't predict the future. So instead of asking what will the future be, it asks a totally different question. What actions make sense across many possible futures?
This approach actually has a name, Decision-Making Under Deep Uncertainty, or DMDU. It's this dynamic, ongoing process. Instead of betting everything on one plan, you explore lots of different options across a whole range of possible futures. You choose the actions that are robust, the ones that work pretty well no matter what happens. Then, you watch what's happening in the real world, and you adapt as you go. It's about being flexible, not being perfect. And this is exactly why that flexibility is so important. Just look at this chart of different crises. That Atlanta snowstorm back in 2014 was a predictable event, low uncertainty, but bad planning led to huge consequences. On the other hand, the COVID-19 pandemic was just off the charts on every single axis. High uncertainty, massive consequence, and incredibly difficult to plan for. You just can't use the same playbook for both. A one-size-fits-all strategy is basically guaranteed to fail. So, where does all this leave us? We've seen that the problems we're up against are all deeply connected. Business disruption is linked to national risk, which depends on social cohesion, which needs a new way of thinking. So it makes sense then that our solutions have to be just as interconnected.
This is what the Social Ecological Technical Systems Model, or SETS, shows so perfectly. It shows that our world is basically made of 3 layers that are all tangled up together. Our technological systems, our cities, our grids, are tied to our social systems, our laws, our economy, and both of those depend completely on our ecological systems, our climate, our water. You can't make a move in one area without causing ripples everywhere else. This is why thinking in silos just isn't an option anymore.
So if no single government agency, no single company, no single organization can solve these huge problems by themselves, what's the alternative? Well, one really powerful idea is the mega community. It's a model for intentional, structured collaboration that brings government, business, and the civic sector, so nonprofits, academia, community groups, all to the same table. It's a framework for tackling the giant problems that are just too big for any one of them to handle alone.
And that brings us right back to where we started. Preparing for an unpredictable future, it isn't about building higher walls or more accurate forecasts, it's about building stronger connections. It's about scanning the horizon together, building resilient governance together, and strengthening our social trust together. When you think about it, maybe the biggest risk we face isn't the next crisis itself, but the possibility that we'll have to face it divided and alone.